Hey, congratulations, everybody. We've officially entered into final exam season, so you've made it. You got to feel happy. You got to feel proud about that. It was a slog at time, I get it. But understand that even though a lot of people start this class, not everybody, unfortunately, not everybody finishes. So you should feel good about that. The final exam is the last official assignment for History 1301. And the point of this video is to kind of familiarize yourself with ways that you might be able to prepare for this exam. Now, the exam itself is going to walk, talk, act, and feel an awful lot like the midterm exam. And what I mean by that, it's got a multiple choice section, it's got a short answer section, and it's got one long answer essay question. So, best way to prepare for this is to refer to the final exam review guide, which is available to you in Canvas. If you haven't done so already, you may need to put me on pause, that's fine. Go into Canvas and then click on the modules button on the very left over there. After in modules, scroll down to the exam review guides and materials. And then I want you to click on the final exam review guide. What should pop up, which you should be looking at right now, is a term bank, okay? Now, these terms ought to look relatively familiar to you, especially if you've been following along in the video lectures. We've been following them relatively closely all semester long, and they're the building blocks. They, much like the midterm, they are the building blocks of my multiple choice questions. I don't need you to have a dissertation quality understanding of any, let alone all of those things. You just need to have a good concept as to what those terms are and how they fit into the context of our class. So, for example, the Missouri Compromise. What I would do if I were you, again, I'm a visual person. I bet a lot of you are too. I would use note cards and I would write on the front of the note card, Missouri Compromise, and then flip the thing over and make a very concerted, deliberate effort, 5 words or less, 5 words that remind your brain of what the Missouri Compromise is and, more importantly, why it's important. If you're able to do that and sort of commit that to some sort of recall memory, you're going to be fine when it comes to navigating the contours of the multiple choice section, okay? Next up, we've got your short answer section. Now, these are questions, these are essay questions, but they're going to answer them in 2 or 4 sentences. Now, will I read more than 4 sentences? Yes, of course. Have I seen people adequately answer these questions in 1 sentence? Yeah, but as a general rule of thumb, 2 to 4 sentences is what you're going to want to shoot for. Anyway, unlike the midterm exam, everyone needs to answer that question involving the Republican Party in the aftermath of the Civil War. Unlike last time, you don't have a choice. That one you have to answer. The good news is we've spent quite a bit of time talking about the Republicans, talking about Reconstruction, what the accomplishments were, okay? So prepare yourself for that one. I guess the silver lining is at least you know what's going to show up when the exam opens up, okay? Now, the other 2 questions, if you scroll down a little bit further, you're going to see one of 2 questions. The first question is going to ask you to compare and contrast the economic and financial approaches of 2 different presidents. One, John Quincy Adams, the other, Andrew Jackson. You can answer that one, or if you prefer, you can talk to me about the evolution of Abraham Lincoln's thoughts on slavery. Keep in mind, early on in his political career, Lincoln didn't really see slavery as a moral issue, and obviously that's going to change, and he's going to, as the Civil War drags on, it's going to reflect the ideals of the American Revolution. Anyway, the last requirement for the exam does involve a long answer essay question. Now, this is relatively weighty, okay? And it's one of those things where I'm not really trying to trick you. I'm not trying to throw something past you. I want you to think critically about this. I asked you on day 1, is America a great exception from other civilizations that have come in the past? You know, some of you said yes in quiz 1, some of you said no, but ultimately, are we an exception? Moving in the direction of, at least by the standards of the ideals of the American Revolution and the Declaration of Independence, Assuming that we are, I think it's safe to say that the growth of government, the rise of industry, and especially chattel slavery jeopardize, at the very least, the concepts of American democracy. Okay, they also potentially threaten, if it is true, American exceptionalism. Okay, how and why? Well, let's start at the top. The growth of government. Think about it. Two presidencies deep into American history, we see John Adams passing laws that restrict the most basic principles, basic concepts of American freedom. Now, keep in mind, Adams is trying to keep a lid on information coming in from Europe, but he's doing so by silencing free speech. The Sedition Act allowed him to imprison dozens and dozens of political prisoners throughout the course of his presidency. So that's one vivid example in terms of the growth of government and how that could potentially jeopardize concepts deeply embedded in American democracy. The rise of industry. Okay, now certainly industry presented a lot of opportunities, but it also raised a lot of questions as well. If you ask someone like Harriet Martineau, one of those Lowell textile workers, what she would probably tell you is that there's an enormous amount of control both on the job but also outside the job as well. Even when you're not being paid, the employers are telling you, listen, you can't go to dance class. We're not going to allow you to do these sorts of things on your own time. We're not paying you, but we're not going to allow you to do them on your own time because you may not be as productive as you otherwise would be if you got a good night's rest. In any case, you can kind of see her point. It's threatening things like equality, personal freedom. Lastly, and probably most obviously, is the rise of and use of chattel slavery. Now, Lincoln presents a very good example of this situation in his own right because, bottom line is, slavery doesn't start out as a moral issue as far as he's concerned. It's a financial issue because the further and farther that slavery goes, the more it crushes economic opportunity for working white people like himself. Now, he's not the only one to pick up on this. People like Frederick Douglass have said more or less the same thing, that it's bad for the white working class. It's a rich man's institution. But as far as people like Lincoln are concerned, especially after 1857, after the Supreme Court says, listen, slavery can basically go anywhere, right, including the Western territories, as far as people like Lincoln were concerned, that was simply blasphemy. Because in addition to eroding economic opportunity for working class whites like himself, because slaves were considered property, especially after 1857, they could be handed down from one generation to the next. So in addition to inheriting the land, you could also inherit the slaves. And what that did was it produced this generational wealth. And we were, in his mind and other people's mind like him, we were moving in the direction, and a not good direction at that, that would have resembled what medieval Europe would have looked like. That you are born poor and you generally tend to stay poor. And what determines whether or not you are poor is largely hereditary. You largely inherit it from the previous generation. And the same thing might be said if you happen to be a rich person. Anyway, if you look beneath the question that I've listed on the review guide, what you're going to see is a laundry list of terms, ideas, events, people, concepts. All right? What those things are, those are things that are very helpful to consider. I am not saying that if you list every single one of them, then you're automatically going to get an A. And I'm also not saying that if you only list two, you automatically get a D. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm getting at is this is me, and I had to write this paper. These are things that I would absolutely consider, okay? That's all I'm saying. And the same thing might be said for the 1 to 3 page guideline. It's not a requirement, not saying that you have to have 2 pages, not saying that at all. What I'm getting at here is if this was me and I had to write this assignment, I'd plan to write at least 2 or 3 pages. It's simply a suggestion, and I hope it helps. Speaking of help, I hope that this video has helped, okay? If you do still have questions, you know how to get a hold of me. You know that I'm approachable, including outside of quote-unquote class time. So if you do have questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. Good luck this final exam season in History 1301 and beyond.